Okay, welcome everybody to the fourth and the last regular session for ScapeCon 2021, after which we will go to the roundtables. And the first person to speak today is Yannis Chatzikonstantinou from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, who will give us a presentation under the title Fire Revolution in Prepalatial Crete, Cremation and Pyrotechnology.
Hello to everyone. Sorry for the delay for those who are waiting in the Zoom, but it's okay. Let me a second to share my presentation. It's okay, can you see it?
Yeah, it's all fine. We can see your presentation.
Perfect. So thank you very much for including. Thank you very much for including. Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for including my presentation in this very interesting and the last session of the conference. Congratulations for to the organizing committee, and thank you very much for the support. My name is Yannis Chatzikonstantinou. I am a PhD candidate in the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki under the supervision of Larissa Tittl. And in this presentation, I will show you briefly the history of research regarding the burial practice of cremation and the burning of human body in prehistoric Crete. And I will share with you some alternative and maybe innovative approaches concerning the use of fire in the human remains during the Prepalatial period between the 3rd and the 2nd millennium BC. So let's start with the term cremation. The practice of cremation has been adopted by several cultures through time and space. The effect of fire on human remains is a powerful technique of transforming the body after death, while it breaks it into several parts without fully destroying it. The exposure of the body to fire causes various physical, chemical, and mechanical alterations, which involve discoloration, fracturing, warping, shrinkage, complete deformation, and removal of the organic component, and modification of the inorganic crystal component of the bones. The scholars, combining macroscopic, experimental, and analytical methods, try to underline the significance of the systematic recording of the heat-induced changes in the burnt bones in order to define the variability of the role of the fire in the manipulation of the deceased in the past societies. Sorry for my voice. So, the history of research. In the Aegean prehistory, the burning of the human body was linked exclusively with the practice of cremation, as you can see also in the map. The increasing evidence of cremains, however, from the Neolithic until the end of the Bronze Age, show that the fire was used in multiple ways in the manipulation of the deceased and played a crucial role in the formulation and negotiation of social roles, relationships, and, of course, identities among the members of the community. In Crete, the research so far has identified the use of fire as part of the primary cremation and deposition of the human remains in cremation urns, pythoid amphorae, and larnakes, dated from the late Minoan period onwards, mainly in cemeteries of eastern and central Crete, as you can see in the map. Moreover, the adoption of cremation was correlated with the strong Mycenaean presence on the island and the broad interaction with regions of Asia Minor and Eastern Mediterranean. However, recent excavations of early and middle Minoan cemeteries combined with the systematic osteoarchaeological study of the human remains, underline that the fire was used in various forms regarding the manipulation of the deceased, rather earlier than initially considered. Many cases where fire was applied on human remains in low intensity have been revealed as part of a short-term secondary ritual process taking place inside the area of the cemeteries. Moreover, there are some indications of burial pyres dating in particular in the Prepalatial period, which lasted for many hours and reached high temperatures, suggesting the accomplishment of high levels of produced thermal energy. The burning events that took place in the Prepalatial Tholos tomb cemeteries signify lengthy, well-planned and systematic procedures, which would evidently require a high amount of energy expenditure and time, combined with a technological expertise in the combustion of the human body. Considering the various and multiple use of fire in the manipulation of the deceased, in the Prepalatial Crete, but in general, the talk will focus on 3 osteological case studies that have already been completed: Livari Skiadi, Camillari, and Koumassa. The osteological studies include the primary macroscopic investigation of the skeletal remains and the application of analytical methods in selected samples. The research follows the guidelines and standards applied internationally for the recording and study of commingled human remains affected by the fire and focus on 3 main goals. First, the identification of the biological attributes of the people whose bodies were subjected to burning. Second, the examination of the taphonomy and macroscopic recording of the thermal alterations on bone structures because of burning. And third, the application of analytical methods in order to record the compositional and microstructural osseous changes of burnt bones. So the first case study is Livari Skiadi. A Tholos tomb at Livari Skiadi in southeastern Crete was excavated by Papadatos and Sofianou, while the results were published in 2012. The osteological study was made by Triandafilou. The tomb is dated from early Minoan 1B to early Minoan 2B, while a high frequency of calcined bones, calcined are the white bones, with severe thermal alterations and distortions were revealed. The osteological study supports that the combustion of the individuals were occurred before the complete decomposition of the human remains, probably in a semi-fleshed or fleshed condition. The severe thermal alterations and the high frequency of white and fragmented bones indicate a lengthy exposure to fire during a well-planned and systematic procedure that took place outside of the Tholos. The lack of any evidence from firing within the area of the tomb, combined with some experimental approaches that have been done so far, indicate that the actual procedure of burning of the body parts took place in an open area away from the immediate area of the tomb, probably as a part of a secondary funerary ritual. The proposed scenario is also supported by the high levels of fragmentation in the skeletal assemblage, denoting continuous removal and post-depositional disturbances rather than deliberate chopping and breakage of the bones as discussed in the past by Brannigan. The second case study is Camillari. The bone assemblage from the Camillari A Tholos tomb on the Messara plain was re-excavated by Girella from the pit where the human remains had been reburied by Dorolevi in the 1950s. The new finds were published by Girella in 2019, while the osteological study was made by Triadafilou as well. The cemetery is dated from Middle Minoan 1B to Late Minoan 3A2. Most of the human bones are affected also by the fire and show variation in the coloration and the thermal alterations. Burning occurred at different temperatures and length of exposure, although intensively burned bones exposed to high thermal energy for a long duration clearly predominated. It is supported that the combustion of the human remains occurred in different stages of decomposition, in dry, fleshed, and semi-fleshed condition. Despite the bones, there are also some artifacts made with clay or metal, which are affected severe by the fire, as well indicating that they accompanied the individuals during the burning process. You can see this in the third picture, the melted material which is attached on the bone surface. Unfortunately, stratigraphical and contextual documentation from the primary disposal of the human remains is missing. However, there are some old excavation photos which demonstrated extended areas of firing inside the Tholos area, while the auxiliary rooms nearby at the main grave complex appear to have housed primary skeletonized remains without any evidence of burning. And the last, but of course not least example, case study, is Koumassa. The cemetery of Koumassa was first excavated by Xanthoudidis in 1904, while a renewed excavation project has been undertaken since 2012 under the direction of Professor Diamandis Panagiotopulos from the University of Heidelberg, Germany. The cemetery is located on the northern fringes of the Asterousia Mountains on a steep slope overlooking the Messara plain and consists of 3 tholi, A, B, and E, and 1 rectangular tomb Gamma, dated from early Minoan 2A to Middle Minoan 1 based on ceramic typology. The osteological material which is recorded so far, has been recorded so far, derives from Tholos B. The skeletal remains of Koumassa Tholos B were found in a commingled state of deposition within the Tholos area. Preliminary evidence concerning the form and the character of the funerary practice were drawn upon the on-site archaeological and osteological observations by Triadafilou. The systematic study and the publication of the human remains is in progress, while some preliminary results are already proposed in my master thesis. Tholos Tomb B accommodated multiple burials taking place over hundreds of years. Most of the bone fragments which were found in Tholos B are heavily burned or preserve smoking traces on their exterior surface. Regarding the burning level of the bones, a similar pattern is observed, while most of them are fully or partially calcined, preserving a fully oxidized white color with some bluish and grayish hues on their exterior, interior, and core surface. That means that the bones reached a maximum level of calcination due to their lengthy exposure on high temperatures above 800 to 1000 degrees Celsius for many hours. Additionally, all the burnt bones have severe changes to their mechanical strength, erosion of the relative cortical preservation, heat-induced fractures, dimensional changes, warping and shrinkage of the bones are some of them. The high levels of warping and shrinkage, combined with a variety of heat-induced fractures, indicate that the human remains were burnt, preserving a large amount of their soft tissues in an early or advanced level of decomposition. Despite the bones, there are also artifacts made with clay or metal, which are affected severe by the fire, indicating that they accompanied the individuals during the burning process, such as the case of Camillari. The conclusions now. The thorough macroscopic, analytical, and bibliographical research involving archaeological, experimental, and ethnographical parallels regarding the effect of fire on bone structure could shed new light to the technological aspects of using the fire in the manipulation of the deceased in prehistoric Crete. In particular, observations could be made concerning features of the burning process, quantity, availability, and type of the fuel used in association with the duration and the thermal intensity of the cremation pyres, information regarding the use of space in the landscape and in areas where the thermal episodes were happened, open areas versus covered and air-limited constructions, and conclusively, suggestions connected with the amount of energy expenditure and the level of technological expertise concerning the burning of the human body in prehistoric Crete. Moreover, the systematic macroscopic examination, the recording of the heat-induced changes, and the application of analytical methods on the bone assemblages deriving from early Minoan cemeteries could offer crucial information regarding the variable conditions implemented for the cremation of the human body. Burning body parts with or without the flesh, articulated or not. Furthermore, the correlation with the published osteological data obtained from other cemeteries in prehistoric Crete offers the opportunity to understand extensively the different local use and tradition of fire in the manipulation of the deceased through time and space. In the end, I would like to thank Sevi Triantafylou for her support, dedication, and friendly supervision during the last years, and Professor Diamantis Panagiotopoulos for the provision of Koumasa Tholos B Tholos assemblage. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, you couldn't hear it probably, but the people were clapping here, Yannis. Thank you for this great presentation. Now I think we need a few minutes.
Yes, maybe
to prepare for the next presentation. So we will be back in around 5 to 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, now we're ready for the second presentation in the session that will be given by Larissa Tittl from University of Melbourne. And the title is Breaking the Boundaries, Sensory Bodies and Disruptive Objects in Minoan Neopalatial Cavescapes. Okay, Larissa, the stage is yours virtually, if you're ready, when you're ready.
Thank you very much. And hello from Melbourne. I sound a little bit like I'm from Eurovision, but I'm not. I'll just get started. Caves are good to think with. As conceptual places, caves let us talk about liminality. They are both openings and closings into the earth. Caves are underworlds, inner worlds, other worlds, places of communion. They are places for the dead, for the ancestors, places of fear, reverence, and remembering. Caves are also good to sense with. As sensorial places, caves offer both darkness and light, shadows, flickerings. Senses may be heightened, focused, diminished in turn, first not seeing, then seeing more, seeing less. We can hear the cave, water dripping, air moving, animals and insects rustling. We can smell and taste the coolness, the dampness, the rock. As our bodies move into and within a cave, we are encompassed. Senses merge with emotions, and we perhaps feel held in comfort or burdened by the earth around us. We sense and feel the rock underfoot, hard, sometimes sharp, sometimes slippery. We sense and feel the rock with our hands, still hard and cool, also worn by past hands, our own remembered hands, and those of our ancestors. In all these ways, caves are also good to be with. As physical places, caves offer space for habitation, burial, refuge, ritual, and deposition. In this paper, I will explore the cavescape as a hybrid place, open to rupture and disrupture through the fluid materiality of both bodies and objects. I will focus on how bodies and objects engaged with cavescapes during ritual activity. Sensory effects were experienced and expressed through movement within the cave and through the objects used and deposited there. I will examine the insertion of double axes into the interstitial spaces of the psycho-cave. I will explore the notion that they were used as agents of disruption, breaking the boundaries between the human and other human realms, boundaries that are particularly permeable in the liminal spaces of caves. First, I will look at caves as sensorial places, then examine them in the context of a Minoan cosmology that viewed the world as a shared realm where human and other than human entities coexisted. Here, caves sat within a wider sacred landscape that operated relationally. Then the cave at Psychro is examined in relation to ritual activity and the depositional behaviour that involved bronze objects, particularly the double axes. The materiality of bronze double axes is then considered, and how this was worked through their ritual use and sensorial effects. Finally, a reflection is offered on what these things may have meant in the context of Neopalatial Crete. As I just outlined, caves are places of sensorial bodily engagement and entanglement. And even before we enter a cave, our bodies, our senses have already been primed and prepared through the journey there. Experiencing the landscape, walking mostly upward, on mostly rocky and perhaps treacherous terrain, our vision focused closely on our feet as they walk that ground, or on the views that open up around us, being twisted and tattered by swift winds or rain, or buffeted by hard sunshine, depending on the weather and the season, feeling exhilarated or exhausted by the effort, depending on our fitness. In the way that walking can often do, our bodies become part of the landscape. By the time we reach the cave, we might not be actively thinking in the traditional sense, but think sensing through our bodies in a more direct way than we would normally notice. We are moved from our quotidian routine, and this might be especially so if we are visiting the cave for ritual activity. Ritual itself can be thought of as a rupture in both time and space, a set apart thing that can let us break the boundaries between things. And then the cave. A cave is already a rupture in the fabric of the world, as noted by Dmitry Mickiewicz. Caves are liminal, straddling the interior and exterior of a landscape, opening up the earth and also enclosing the space opened. The cave's liminality is both constructed by and expressed through this sense of it being a place of rupture or even a place of disruption. There is darkness here, spatial disorientation, and both sensory deprivation and intensification. In entering a cave, we may feel as though we have crossed or transgressed a boundary. Once inside the cave, the sensorial experience is one of intensification. Montello and Moyes argue for a cross-cultural, quasi-phenomenological experience of the cave space, one based on the interaction between the physical features of caves and human physiological features. While this argument is valid, it also fails to consider the cultural mediation of human responses to the environment and to sensory experience. Although some aspects of the cave environment may be physiologically cross-cultural, it also seems likely that sensorial and emotional responses to cavescapes are culturally specific and non-homogeneous. Indeed, it can be argued that the material culture of Neopalatial Crete conveys a sense of acceptance regarding liminality, boundary crossing, fluid taxonomies, and hybridity. The nature-based focus evident in so much of the Minoan archaeological record leads to a consideration of how a Minoan cosmology may have evolved, perceiving the landscape as a dynamic, numinous, and shared realm in which interactions with other than human entities formed the basis of much ritual activity. This encompasses special places and formations in the landscape, and what we would normally think of as inanimate objects such as rocks, stones, stalactites and stalagmites, as well as animals, plants, fantastic or hybrid beasts. All of these things that feature in the glyptic art, frescoes, and decorated ceramics of Crete. Here, relational ontologies and a new animist approach offer new ways of considering ritual responses to the natural environment, so that it becomes not so much about worship or devotion, although this is still present, but about connection, communication, negotiation, transformation, and relation. The cavescape is not just a place for ritual activity or for propitiating deities. It is a place where ritual participants are involved in a dynamic and symbiotic relationship with the cave and with the landscape. The other than human realm was a place imbued with sentience. We can see this in the iconography displayed in glyptic work, where anthropomorphic figures interact directly with rocks and trees. We can also see this, I think, in the deliberate insertion of bronze objects into the cave walls in the Psycho cave. Over time, places and natural features are imbued with significance, perhaps due to ancestral memories and associations with particular activities or deities. Human and non-humans engaged in a dynamic relationship where the boundaries between them were fluid, where moments of transformation from one state of being to another, such as birth, maturity, or death, were protected, being dangerous, and enhanced, being also significant, through ritual, and where these moments required negotiation so that the boundaries could be crossed, recrossed, or even breached for good. Moments of transformation and transition were ritually charged, and for this, a highly charged elemental object was needed as a tool of mediation. This may be one of the ways in which the double axes were used in the Psycho cave. Psycho is one of the most significant sacred caves on Crete, both in terms of the length of time over which it was used and the nature of the objects deposited there. Also known as the Dictaean cave, Psycho is located above the Larissa Plateau in eastern Crete at an altitude of 1,025 metres. The cave lies about 500 feet above the modern village of Psycho. The cave has two chambers known as the upper and lower grottos. Both of these show evidence of ritual activity, including public and also more restricted ceremonies, feasting and object deposition. Turning our focus now to the lower chamber, this is reached through a steep path that descends from the upper chamber. The lower chamber is notable for the large number of spectacular limestone concretions, stalactites and stalagmites present, along with a large pool of water that extends to the back wall of the cave. Hogarth's excavation uncovered over 200 examples of bronze weapons from the lower chamber, along with 18 of the 28 double axes. Other bronze objects included personal adornments such as hair and clothing pins, fibulae, amulets and rings, bronze toiletry objects such as razors, tweezers and bronze needles. Most of these had been inserted into crevices within and between the stalactites and stalagmites and the cave's niches, with some also left in or at the edge of the pool. 54 anthropomorphic bronze figurines were also found in the lower chamber. These figurines are notable for their hand and arm gestures, which are connected to ritual behaviour. We can think of human bodies also affecting these same stances, perhaps at certain points in the ritual. Hitchcock argues that one of these gestures, gesture 4, expresses power, perhaps indicating a social ranking connected to religious hierarchy. Gesture is linked by some to somatic or even transcendent experiences during rituals, heightening the emotional intensity and perhaps the strength of memories. With the insertion of bronze objects directly into the cave walls and limestone formations, there is a sense of mineral or elemental return to the earth. In this way, deposition can be thought of as a strategy of communication and negotiation with the elemental natural world. The bronze objects create an intimate connection between those participants who carry, hold, and deposit the object and the cavescape itself. Here, the value of bronze goes beyond its status as an elite substance, a result of long-distance trade and of relative rarity. The value of bronze also lies in its minerality, its materiality, its sensorial effects. Bronze is composed of copper and tin. The metallurgical processes needed to transform these alloys into bronze and then to transform the bronze into objects would likely have been thought of as what we might call magical. A substance like bronze moves from a solid state to a liquid one and then reforms in the shape of something familiar. Metalsmith work is often viewed as dangerous, a liminal and disruptive activity itself. Think of the physically damaged, although not through his work, Hephaestus. It is also viewed in many cultures as aligned with magical practices. This elemental, dangerous and dynamic process is remembered by the object and becomes part of its essence. At each point in the process, the bronze has changing tactile and visual properties, behaving, looking and feeling different at each point of its transformation. This transformative essence is what gives the bronze object its power and makes it such an apt object for rituals around the transformative parts of a human life cycle, birth, death, maturity, and also for ideas around power and status. To explore this further, think of taking a bronze axe to the Sacro cave for deposition. Were they carried by people in their arms or somehow slung on their backs? Without the modern path, the walk up would have meant negotiating many small stones and larger rocks. An axe may have dug into someone's back, causing discomfort or pain, or one may have fallen, clattering on the stony ground and causing shock or surprise. Passage through the cave to the lower grotto would have been tricky. Navigating through this place of sensory intensification, would you notice the stalactites and stalagmites, their twisting forms? Would you hear the slow dripping of water? Did someone have a lamp to light the way? Or would your concentration be focused on the axe you carried, searching for the right spot to deposit it? The axe, how would it have felt? Hard, cool, but warm where you touched it? Smooth or slightly textured? The edges sharp or dulled? Did you touch a smooth rock on the way and notice how similar it felt to the axe? Perhaps there was music or singing, perhaps words were spoken, the ancestors remembered, a boulder embraced. When you left the axe behind in the cave, was it a relief? Was the way out easier as everyone made their way back to the opening where the bright world waited? In the cave at Sacro, we might think of double axes as agents of disruption, inserted as they were into the cave walls and limestone concretions. The double axes are not dead or mute. They are active agents working directly upon the world, working on behalf of those who deposited them. It is likely that communal memory would have recognised caves in general as places of burial in the past, and so made a connection between caves and ancestors. Perhaps a rupture in the boundary between the worlds was necessary for remembering or calling on these ancestors, or for accessing the other than human realm for other reasons. That the double axe was used in this matter is not a matter of chance. As both functional tool in other forms and ritually charged symbol, the double axe contains dualities and encompasses fluidity in its own identity. That bronze was restricted to elite use seems likely, given its rarity and the difficulty of procurement and manufacture. This then raises the issue of who engaged in ritual behaviour in Neopalatial caves. If only an elite cohort were involved, what does this mean for a Minoan cosmology premised upon an interconnected and sacred landscape? It may be the case that the smaller bronze objects were available for non-elites to use at ritually charged moments. While it is generally accepted that an elite element connected to the Neopalatial complexes co-opted ritual sites during this period, drawing on the associations embedded within the sacred landscape and the connections with divine or numinous powers, we might also consider if the bronze double axes, along with the figurines, reveal a level of intra-elite status anxiety, angling and jostling for power, perhaps seeing what your competitor had left behind during the last ritual and bringing something bigger next time. This competition may have been expressed obliquely through ritual practice. The double axe ruptures contemporary distinctions between the practical and symbolic, just as the cave space ruptures the distinctions between sacred and social, inside and outside, and the human and non-human realms. In a Minoan world, where the boundaries between what we think of as non-negotiable dualities were seen as permeable, and where these fluid boundaries were able to be traversed, the ritual deposition of axes constructs and maintains connections and negotiates these boundaries. Thank you very much for listening and for watching.
Yeah.
Oh, works. Okay. Thank you very much, Larissa, for this fascinating talk. What time is it in Melbourne now? Melbourne.
It's almost about to go 8 o'clock in the evening.
8 o'clock in the evening.
We're all very happy here in Melbourne because we're out of lockdown. So
out of lockdown. Okay. Happy.
We've had several here. So celebrating with a conference is fantastic, even though I can't be there because I'm still not allowed out of the country.
Okay. Out of the lockdown, that's something, because I think we are heading towards one. So, so on the opposite side. Okay, thank you for this presentation again. The questions will come after the whole session, and now we need a small, short break, very short break before the next presenter comes in. Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think we're ready for the last regular presentation on this this year's ScapeCon conference, and it will be delivered by a former organizer, my doctor now, Katarzyna Dudlik from Mickiewicz University, with a presentation entitled "More Than Just a Structure: A Contextual Study of Prosymna's Sepulchral Architecture." The stage is yours, this time literally and physically, but I hope our online people can also hear and see. You can confirm on the chat if everything's working. Okay.
Thanks. Thanks a lot. Just let me share the screen. Okay, great. Hello, everybody. Thanks. First of all, a big thank you to the organizers of the ScapeCon 2021. It's really amazing that we can be here, at least partially, part of us. Congrats for the organization of this very challenging hybrid forum event. So yeah, big thank you. And let's talk a little bit about the sepulchral architecture, the funerary architecture, the meaning of this architecture in a connection with the burial ritual, and based on the case study of Prosymna. So death in prehistoric societies is seen as one of the most aspects and substances of human culture, as the responses to death are one of the most constitutive and formative in terms of shaping community relationships and dependencies. It is a part of the processual theoretical movement in archaeology that burials are understood as having a deeply metaphysical meaning, communicating the ideological and symbolic aspects of the culture. A recently proposed approach, which I would also utilize here, calls for a reimagining of funerary practices in relation to context-situated human action, which utilizes performative notions coming from both the locale and human activity. It postulates that all the aspects of funeral and its surrounding were tightly interrelated and affect each other, including the funeral landscape, architecture, treatment of the body. The notion of fields of action entails a theory of agency, performance, and habitation, offering a mature theoretical framework within which social actions, material resources, places, and traditions can be structured. The perception of mortuary practices as situation human action also offers a suitable tool in which the plurality of social contexts related to the rite can be revealed. This applies both to those meanings concerning the deceased themselves, as well as those oscillating around the descendants, a living community that attempts to maintain the status quo of its self-awareness. And saying living community, we need to remember that mortuary ritual engages the audience, binding certain individuals at a particular time. It can be further argued that the funerary ritual has an expressive character, in a way that the action is explicit and necessarily public to some extent, providing a context in which people emotionally articulate their position within the group. And this is, for example, a case for mourning procession, funeral feasts, and post-funeral rites. To this, however, the construction of burial monument itself should be added, as it involves a commitment of a community in terms of labor force and necessary materials. In this paper, therefore, I would like to give a key attention to the funerary architecture and challenge the hypothesis of its tripartite structural division that appears to have further consequences in the different stages of the ritual. These include the actual ceremony of placing the body inside the grave together with burial assemblages, and various actions undertaken as a part of the liminal and post-liminal rites. And I would like to discuss this hypothesis on the basis of a study of one of the key sites in Argolid, the cemetery of Prosymna. The cemetery was established as extramuros necropole as early as in the LH1 period, serving and being well connected with the nearby settlement. Typically for the Mycenaean burial areas, it is also located in the vicinity of water stream. The cemetery further demonstrates the advanced organization with grave clusters arranged linearly. The factors standing behind the chosen locality and organization of the funerary area are complex and actually seem to exceed a primary concern for suitable geological condition for rock-cut architecture. The clear tendency for clustering allows us to suggest that the community is invested in showing certain ties and perhaps dependencies. They could be of a kind of tribal character, socially dictated, or religiously imposed. It is important to say that all the primarily established group continued within the late Bronze Age period through adding new structures. Moreover, the earlier Middle Helladic and late Bronze Age graves are juxtaposed in Prosymna, so despite the change of the tomb architecture, the cemetery, at least in this memory sphere, continued. And as said, the chamber tomb cemetery was established in late Helladic I period. The subsequent LH2A phase brought a significant increase in building activity, followed by a decrease during the LH2B and LH3A1 periods. The peak of this activity appeared in LH3A2, and the use of the cemetery of Prosymna gradually increased from late Helladic 2A to LH3A2, with a break only during LH3A1. And the last period of use corresponds to the end of the building activity at the site, which is LH3B period. The architecture of the chamber tomb itself is quite easy to define, of course. The graves were carved in the soft rock, They are characterized by linear tripartite structure with a distinguished corridor called dromos, then a narrow entrance that is stomion, and often blocked by a wall and the burial chamber. This standardized architecture is further characterized by numerous variations in all its elements. The alteration can be observed in length and width of the dromoi, method of carving and finishing stomia, and finally in the shapes and sizes of the burial chambers. In addition, chamber tombs can be enhanced by various additional features, such as antechambers, niches, pits, occurring both in dromoi and the chamber, platforms or benches that is characterized of the chambers. And in addition, the quality differences in the execution of all individual elements can be noted. And as said, when we consider Prosymna, the length of the passages varying from 1.6 meter, that is case of tomb 11 to the left, to as much as almost 19 meters, as is the case of tomb 44 to the right. Additionally, two predominated types could be recognized, that is broad and narrow, in contrast to the broader diversity and intense experimentation on the forms in the prepalatial phases. In the palatial phases, that is LH32 and 3B, narrow dromoi are clearly preferred, and they average around 12 meters long. The doorways to the graves were carefully shaped with an inward inclination of their jambs. They were blocked with walls made of rough and unworked stones, usually of small to medium size, and mixed with clay or mud. Larger stones were applied to the lower parts of the walls, and during the opening of the grave, they usually remained untouched. Since the doorways were usually left without any further ornamentation, it is interesting that one of the graves, namely Tomb 2, had a unique painted stuccoed facade. Significant differences are observable when the burial chambers are compared. The variety of shapes and sizes is broad. However, a greater consistency in the choice of a rectangle outline is evident, especially during the prepalatial period. The additional shapes include circular, oval, quadrangular, and semicircular shapes. The architecture of the chambers, especially during the palatial period, could be additionally articulated with walk roofs, which were either vaulted or nearly flat. The large tombs are the second most popular and are indeed almost as common as medium-sized tombs. Finally, there are various additional features in the dromoi or inside the chambers. Side rooms are known from 5 tombs. One was uniquely supplemented by 3 antechambers. Prosymna tomb also revealed a number of pits and cysts, or occasionally niches located both inside the chambers and dromoi, and statistically 8 out of 10 graves attest some kind of additional structure. The platforms of benches appear in every 5th grave. The location seems to be additionally conditioned, since they are all located along the right-handed wall of the chamber. The chronological distribution of these features, however, does not suggest any patterns. No proper grave stele have been found. However, large, rough, and unworked pieces of stone were recorded in several dromoi at the inner ends or above the stomia, and we can consider them as a kind of grave marking. Here is also a quick look to the additional architectonic features in chamber tombs. And inhumation was a standard procedure, followed by a secondary treatment of the buried remains. At the time of the funeral, it seems that the extended position was slightly more preferable than a contracted one, with no specific patterns in the orientation of the body. The tomb's architecture confirms that they were intended for repeated deposition. Moreover, the explicit preference towards medium and large-sized tombs determined the number of interments. At Prosymna, the minimum number of the individuals buried in one tomb ranges from 2 to as many as 23 or even 27 people. In the majority of the graves, the minimum number of individuals buried between 5 and 12, giving an average of 9 people per tomb. In most of the cases, the remains, together with burial assemblages, were deposited directly on the floor of the chamber. The unique situation, however, in which the skeleton was still resting on top of the benches, that was recorded in Prosymna tombs 11, 13, 26, and 50. The funerary offerings deposited with the deceased cover the whole spectrum of objects usually found in Mycenaean graves. The most common categories were ceramic vessels serving drinking and pouring purposes, placed alongside unguent and oil containers. Common offerings also included pieces of personal adornments, especially neck jewelry, and decorations of funerary garments. In most of the graves, small statite or terracotta bantams were also retrieved. This assemblage of weaponry includes such elements as swords, spearheads that we saw yesterday, some of them at least, daggers, and arrowheads. Within the group of metal implements, bronze knives, razors, and toiletry sets can be also mentioned. Finally, a widespread offering type included terracotta figurines in a variety of anthropo and zoomorphic forms. After the tomb was closed, it is assumed that a final funerary toast was performed, together with last libation poured. The groups cut under the entrances of Prosymna tombs 2, 37, and 44 could facilitate this act, allowing the liquid to penetrate under the entrance to the burial chamber. The performance of water, wine, blood libation is especially interesting. It is most likely indicated by the occurrence of animal-shaped vessels in tombs again 11, 21, and 37. After the ceremony, the dromos was predictably backfilled. After the body decomposed, the remains were collected into ossuaries against the walls of the chambers or deposited into the pits, seized niches, or antechambers of the tomb. On this occasion, it seems that part of the original funerary furniture was collected and removed from the grave. The reopening of the grave and secondary burial rites were most likely preceded by the fumigation of the atmosphere. This is widely represented by firing facilities found inside the tombs and layers of the burnt earth. For example, moreover, Prosymna tomb 44 revealed also a small table of the offerings that is significantly damaged by fire, which may imply the sacral character of this rite, in addition to the purely practical effects of cleaning the air inside the tomb. The Mycenaean burial practices encompass a number of both performative and more inclusive actions, including the preparation of the corpse, transportation to the grave, deposition, and a variety of liminal rites. Both the organization of the funerary landscape and, even more importantly, the execution and elaboration of the sepulchral architecture appear to have further consequences in the different stages of the ritual. The first stage of the funeral most likely encompasses the gathering of the participants of the rite, mourners, and the initiation of the acts of preparing the corpse for the deposition inside the grave. The procession was the most public and open event of the Mycenaean funeral. Groups of people moved between the domestic settlement locus and the cemetery, crossing the physical and symbolic boundaries separating them. The approach of the funerary procession to the grave chamber indicates a significant limitation of the number of participants in the subsequent stages of the ritual. The mourners were effectively broken into subgroups, those allowed to enter the burial chamber and those left outside in the dromos with limited vision of the activity inside, and even more with the people left behind the dromos and around. The number of the participants in the medium-sized tombs could vary between 12 and 25 people, while the large ones could accommodate as many as 50 people. The dromoi were also featured features that channeled the attention of the participants to the entrance and the chamber rituals. When approaching into the dromos, the individual sense of surrounding was altered completely. All peripheral vision was restricted by tall and narrowing walls. The sound from the outside was muted and the light reduced. At the same time, the long corridor suddenly narrowed at the stone and caused the funerary rites to be exclusive and for a defined number of participants only. These stages of the funerary ritual were aimed at detaching the deceased from the living reality and place it within a new one associated with the sphere of the ancestors. The liminal acts following the deposition of the body with a variety of grave offerings were followed by ceremonial drinking, pouring libation, animal sacrifices, etc. The final act of closing the tomb with a last toast in honor of the dead completed the ritual of passage, after which the deceased was fully integrated into the supernatural realm. The reconstruction of the Mycenaean funerary ritual proposed here fits the idea of mortuary practices as a rite of passage. Its tripartite pattern can be recognized with a stage of separation, transition, and final reintegration. The first occurs during the primary burial, when the soul is separated from the body. The second transitional stage happens at the time between the primary and the secondary burial rites, when the body is decomposing and when the soul travels to the afterworld. The reintegration is materialized in acts of the secondary treatment of the body and the burial assemblages, when the soul reaches the world of the ancestors, signaling the victory over death. And this pattern, this tripartite pattern, is not restricted to the act of the burial rites, though. It can be also detected in the tomb design, divided into 3 distinct parts of action: dromos, stomion, and the burial chamber. The architectonic design supported the performative aspects of the funerary rite, stimulating the flow of the mourners and their perceptions. Through the passage into the grave entrance and the chamber, each being a principal stage of the ritual. In addition, each section of the tomb seems to be correspond with a particular phase of the ceremony. Therefore, the dromos can be associated with the living and the rites of the separation, transition channel between the spaces of different cognitive and symbolic values, from life to death and from the visible society to the invisible realm of the ancestors. Stomion would be a boundary zone, a barrier between the literally and spiritually separating the world of the living and the dead, the natural from the supernatural. Finally, the chamber can be understood as a symbolic reintegration location, the final stage of the incorporation of the deceased to the realm of the ancestors and a permanent shelter of the ancestral spirits. The additional architectural features could facilitate the customary rites on one hand, while on the other, they could reflect a set of beliefs in a presence and participation of the dead in the commemorative rites in their honor. The benches and the platforms could be a symbolic seat for the deceased, for example, while the groves could be channels of communication through which the ancestral spirit can receive invocation and libations. The presence of antechambers, niches, seats, etc., seems to be directly connected with the multiple use of the graves and the introduction and development of the secondary treatment of the deceased. And just to quickly sum up, it can be stated that the new dimension of the time and space, natural and supernatural, come together in the Mycenaean funerary architecture. Its structure has played an important role also in structuring the ritual itself, through dromos and stomion to find its combination in burial chamber. Each element of the Mycenaean chamber tomb was designed specifically to fulfill the special needs of this ritual. And it is important to notice that this very basic division of Mycenaean funerary architecture was established very early in the Mycenaean period. The further searching and experimentation of various elements took place throughout the whole Late Bronze Age. And this is also what Prosymna illustrates at best, this searching and experimentation on the form as well. Thank you very much for the attention.
Yeah. Mute and the share screen. Yeah, I think so. But you need to end the screen share. So thank you very much, Kasia, for this presentation. Really interesting. And now we move to questions, to the discussion with questions to all 3 speakers of this session. We are now fairly used to the hybrid form, so we'll try to make it all work. If the online users, if they have any questions, they can write them in the chat and I'll pass them here. So don't be shy and write whatever's on your mind. But I can't see anything for now, so we can move to questions from the room? And we have one.
Okay. I have one question for Yannis Chatzikonstantinou and the pyrotechnology of the cremation, if Yannis is ready.
Yes, yes, of course. I cannot hear.
Yeah. You need to just wait a second. We need your speakers to be on. Yeah, can
Okay.
you try now?
Okay, Yannis. Can you hear us?
Yes, I didn't hear the question.
Okay, I didn't make the question. I'm going
You have the question. Okay, yes.
What I have to ask you, Yannis, is that the earliest cremations from Crete are dated to the early Minoan II period, isn't it?
It depends on what we think of cremation, because cremation is a ritual practice. So actually, we don't have cremations like we have in North Macedonia in urns, but we have some burnt bones which are deposited inside big areas. So this is a different ritual practice in comparison with what happens in North Macedonia. But we have some, I don't call it cremation, I call it the use of fire in the human bones, actually. It's a terminology problem.
Okay,
yes, it is the earliest examples are found in the three case studies that I showed to you. Koumassa and Livari with Camillari, the three Tholos tomb cemeteries.
Okay, what I actually wanted to ask is that in early Bronze Age too, we have the first indications for firing in closed kilns from the Aegean. So I would like to ask you if you have any idea for the origin of this know-how of firing things in high temperatures, and if we could make a correlation between this fact, the introduction of the kilns in the Aegean, and the first cremations that date to the early Bronze Age.
Very nice question, and it is very important to correlate the things. Pyrotechnology is the common in everything, in pottery, in metallurgy, and in manipulation of the deceased as well. Yes, I think that probably there is a correlation, because the fires that were set up for the cremation of the bodies were reached high temperatures. They were not accidentally high temperature fires. So yes, I think that those who lighted up fires were expertised individuals, and probably knew very well how to construct a very successful pyre. So probably yes, I think that the correlation is very it's very important to be highlighted. And but we have also some examples from Macedonia that actually made things because we have the cremations from the Neolithic period on the Macedonia, and we don't have examples for pottery kilns or metal kilns in this period. So we have to find more data in order to support this very nice suggestion with a correlation. But in my opinion, I think that, of course, there is a correlation with all this pyrotechnology expertise between the areas and between also the individuals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Yannis.
Okay. Do we have, yes, we have another question from the audience. Yeah, so I mute now. Okay.
We cannot hear anything. I don't know if you answered something.
Hello, thank you for your yeah, hopefully fixed. Thank you for your all presentations. I have three questions, each for each speaker. The first is for Mr. Chatzikonstantinou. I would like to ask if it could be traced any distinctive changes or characteristics of the cremation practices or the so-called, as you shown us, the tradition of manipulation of the deceased between the Prepalatial and the Neopalatial period.
Thank you very much for the question. The general problem with the manipulation of the deceased in general, not only about the cremation, is that during the palatial period, we don't have traces about the dead individuals. So until now, I don't know any site which are burnt bones deposited there. So we don't know in general what did they do with their dead individuals during the palatial periods, even the pre-palatial and also the Neopalatial. So I'm sorry, but we don't have traces until now. And maybe, I don't know, in the future, probably I can answer your question. But the interesting is that despite the fact that during the palatial period we don't have any trace, after the palatial period, after the end of the Minoan palaces, we have the rise of cremation, and actually we have the original version of cremation, the well-known cremation, which is well-known in general. And this is correlated with the Mycenaean presence on the island, and probably on the interaction with the regions of Minor Asia. So in order to conclude, we have the early Minoan examples from Crete, then we have a gap, and then we have the late Minoan examples that are correlated with the Mycenaeans and the other regions of the Mediterranean Peninsula. Mediterranean area. So unfortunately, I cannot answer to your question with details. Thank you.
So I think we have an answer still, that there is a gap, as you said, from early to palatial period to the middle at least. I would like to ask another question to Ms. Larissa. The question is that could the ritual function of double axe be different in cave or non-cave contexts? And what could be, in your opinion, the possible symbolic functions as well as the separate relation of double axe, stalagmite structures and sacred rocks with the Minoan ontology?
Oh, that's a multiple answer question. So the first part of it was, can you repeat the first bit? Was it about different uses?
Could the ritual function of double axe be differ in cave or non-cave contexts?
Yeah, I think it's highly likely that it did. It seems to have been something that meant different things across both chronology and geography as well. So I think there were some double axes deposited in a crevice at Euctus, And there were also some examples in the Idaean cave, but they're all quite disparate stylistically and chronologically. They were also the ones that were part of the, some people think it's a hoard, some people think it's a ritual deposit at the Akalakori cave. So I think they had a ritual function, and I think there were also examples, but they look quite different, and they're manufactured differently, that are kind of more practical double axes as well, that kind of have different edges, or they're thicker. So the ones in the caves are all quite relatively thin and not really able to be used as axes in any kind of physical sense. But I think the particularities of what they were used for most likely changed. I think the few caves that were in use in Neopalatial times were quite focused in terms of what went on there, but it's actually quite difficult to distinguish all of the uses that might have gone on, just because a lot of the stratigraphy is so difficult to work out as well. And your other question was about axes and stalagmites and rocks and ontology. Was that what you were asking?
Yes, if there is any possible symbolic function or the separate relation of a double axe. I mean that what of these three features that you have shown us could have a relation with the Minoan ontology. So I mean, it's in your opinion.
Yeah, well, I think from what I've been looking at over the past few years, I think they operated within what people call a relational ontology. So a world where relationships between different elements of entity in that world were premised on connections between those entities rather than differences between them. So I think there's a thread running through all of the ritual practices that we kind of, and especially the ones that we see focused in the Neopalatial period, where they were also kind of connected to elite practices and elite co-option. But I think those things were already there for the elites to call upon. So just a sense that the world was a place where the world was shared between both human and non-human entities, that included both objects made of metal, objects made of stone, or objects made of clay, included rocks and boulders in the landscape. So possibly not all of them, but at least some special ones, which is kind of related to the beetles that you see in some of the palaces. And I think stone was also another very special substance. And I think with both stone and metal, what was special about them was their materiality and their sensorial properties. So they were kind of used as objects that could operate as ways of engaging directly with the non-human world, rather than the landscape being a place where you worshipped a deity directly, or where you kind of left offerings hoping for something from a deity. I think it was more about having some kind of direct connection with the landscape. A little bit similar to maybe some indigenous ontologies that we still see today, and probably also continuing from Neolithic practices as well. So I think there's a sense of sentience or animation within those kind of features, landscape features, double axes, the boulders that could be activated through ritual practice. Does that answer what you were asking?
It's a long discussion.
It is a long
Yes,
discussion.
so I will not discuss further. I am delighted that you are at least. I mean that you are positive that these features have indeed a relationship with the ontology of the Minoan ontology. I would like to have a more illustrated view about each of the features, but as you can understand, as all we can understand, it's a very long discussion. So I don't want to use time
Okay.
for this.
I
Anyway,
understand.
I am covered with your answer.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. It was a good question.
And now we have another question from Adonis. To whom?
To Larissa. I'll use the time. So Larissa, thank you very much for your presentation. It was really fascinating. Having myself quite an interest in bronze and bronze items as well, I would like to actually complement somehow Yoros mentioned. I've considered quite many times that the bronze and metals and bronze present like seemingly magical activities in a fascinating way. And what I would like to comment actually more likely is that of course the double axe bears a strongly symbolic meaning apparently, but also what at least has come to my attention is that the concept of the double axe is being used and also in a more materialistic, let's say, way. And I'll try to explain myself. Double axes are commonly found among hordes as well. But what I have come to notice is that the form of the double axe usually found on hordes is different from the typical Minoan double axe, the one the more rounded edges. That's the typical sign of Minoan double axe. So I would like just a comment, not of course an answer. Whether there could be a disruption based on the form of the double axe in these two occasions, the ones that they appear to be in ritual caves and used in ritualistic ways, and those that appear to be in hordes that could be ritualistic as well, but possibly have also, let's say, materialistic, which is not really, of course, the appropriate term, but it has been assumed or suggested that it could be used as a means to standardize also the form of metal of bronze and like a weight what's it called?
A weight standard or something.
Yeah, like a measuring system.
Okay.
If you understand my question.
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, well, there are the bronze ingots, oxhide ingots that are found as well. And I think there were a few of them in the Archaeology cave, which is disputed as to whether that's just a hoard or if it has some ritual function as well. And for me, what I've really been getting at in a lot of my research is trying to think outside that kind of binary of ritual versus non-ritual. So what I get the sense of is that that wasn't a binary that was either important or even part of the thinking. So I think if something looks more like a hoard, it doesn't necessarily mean that it wasn't also, or it wasn't even something else. And I think again, the double axe is such a, a polyvalent object as well as symbol, and quite a lot of people have written on this, that it has all of those meanings in those different forms. And I think even the ones that are used in ritual and what we might call symbolic ways, I think even those ones still encompass the idea of a practical axe, because it's being used symbolically in a way that a practical axe would work, to cut open something, to get inside the wall of the cave. But of course the problem is that there aren't that many cave sites in Crete that were used in this way. So it's really difficult to extrapolate a whole ontology or cosmology just from the evidence that we have. Although I do like to try to extrapolate. It can be fun. Okay. Was that an answer? Or...
All right. Thank you very much, Larissa.
Thank you for the comment.
But maybe I was gonna just. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Kasia. I'd like. All right. We're talking about late Helladic 1 until 3B, one cemetery and long period of time. My question would be, do we notice a change? Also, of course, we're talking about changes in differences in ritual. Are we talking about? Can you hear me? What? Louder. Sorry, I'm so tired right now. All right. The question is, can we? Actually, I would like a comment. Can we notice a difference in the audience of the rituals? Are we talking about kins, communities, family? Or we have a picture of this?
Yep.
Yeah.
And try to speak to
Okay. So we can maybe switch.
Yeah, that's
okay.
what I was. I said at the beginning.
So I would love to answer this question, but it's almost impossible. What we can notice is that because also, the thing is that there's so many differences. Like the development within one site is one thing. The development, like, I don't know, like changing the sizes and the shapes of the tombs within one site. The other thing is that there are so many differences between not even regions, between two sites within one region or three sites within one region, that we cannot do any like more general comment. So we have this basic idea of the tomb that is, three parts. But then there's so many regional and between sites differences that we cannot actually make a huge like one story. So if we think about the audience, the one thing which we can understand is that usually in the prepalatial period, so let's assume until LH3-1, we have much more differences between the tombs that are built between 1 and 3-1. During the palatial period, everything is like more structured. There is no so many differences maybe. Like, but here in Prosymna, for example, in the prepalatial period, actually, we have this tendency to the rectangular chamber tombs that is different in the palatial period, so we have like more variability. In other sites, we have like more structured tombs in the palatial period. So we can assume that maybe the community that was building those tombs was also more structured in terms of the social structure. But it's a guessing, and it's also changing between the sites. So it's very difficult to say something about the living audience. We can also take some iconographic evidence, but it's again like the Tanagra Larnakes. They are talking about the audience maybe in Tanagra, but can we assume that in Argol it was the same? Hard to say. I think also with the audience and the ritual, we have some basic structure, but also the alternatives between the regions at least might be significant, but it's very hard to catch them with the evidence we have, unfortunately.
Where's the thing? There was a thing here.
Just
See,
mute?
it disappeared.
Okay. I have also a question for Kasa, and my question is that concerning the symbolic architecture of Mycenaean tombs, what could be, in your opinion, okay, informal or formal, you decide, the cognitive aspects of the symbolic movement for a living one participant during the funerary rite, entering the gate to the other world in marks, and living still alive. I can clarify this, that what is the cognitive aspect of someone that participates in a funerary rite, probably for a kind of his relative or even a known of his village or city or whatever in that time. So what is the cognitive aspect, the symbolic aspect, when this participant enters from the dromos, from the living world, when he enters into the other world and then returns back alive?
Okay, so to answer that, we need to think that when the procession is approaching with the dead person, however, they are carrying this dead person to the grave. This is a carriage, or I don't know, somehow they're carrying the dead person to the grave. So we need to imagine that when they approach to the grave, they started to limit people who can enter. So what I can probably, it's a huge guessing, right? And a huge question mark here. Yes. So if we think about the symbolic and cognitive aspects, I think that the people who were able to actually enter because to the dromos, maybe the bigger group of people were allowed to enter. So this could be, for example, the relatives. But if we think about the chamber, this could be probably the very, very limited amount of people putting the dead inside to the chamber. So probably this would be people somehow connected maybe with religion, with the cult. I don't know, priests maybe. So, if we think about this, also the thing that this person is coming back from this ancestor sphere, I think this could be actually limited to, the very specific group of people, the very specific social group that could, enter and come back. So probably maybe somehow connected with the religion, like priests or something like this. So I don't know if this, okay.
Okay, I want to make another guess in this story that it's a limited space but it can be visited by many. I mean that the tomb, when the dead can be deposited there, it can be visited after his relatives and the rest of the friends and general. I mean that it can be a big amount of people that just visit during the funerary rites that are happening around the tomb. This is one image, but I will illustrate a little bit more in the symbolic meanings that a person that gets inside to this world, that knows that his friend, his relative, anyway, is departing to somewhere. What is the affection? What is the symbolic meaning? And in his psychology and his cognitive development, after he consciously he is aware of what is happening, and still he knows that he will enter this tomb or some kind of grave sometime, but he's still leaving the gate behind, and he is alive while someone is departing from somewhere else. So I mean that in which what cognitive aspects or symbolism can be traced from this kind of movement, because all of it is symbolic, it's a rite. So after this, what could be traced even in arts or whatever is any I mean that can be unfolded an idea of the rebirth, of regeneration, or whatever, in somehow when coming out of this kind of psychology that can be okay, because all these people, some of them are in arts, okay, so they can transfer this kind of feelings and experiences. So this is, I mean, I think you now understood.
Okay, so the thing is, okay, we can think about, like, you know, the symbolism of the rebirth or resurrection or whatever, but I think still it was kind of limited to those people that were allowed to enter the tomb. And I don't think the usual, like the common people were allowed to actually enter the tomb. Like you said, that's the family or the friends, because after the burial, the tomb was closed. And we have this liminal rites, probably the smashing of the pottery of the entrance and pouring libation, something like this. And then probably also the dromos was backfilled. This is also one huge question, if the dromos remained open or it was backfilled. So I'm not sure actually we have, you know, people, like regular people entering the tomb in the Mycenaean times. I think it was still kind of limited to a very specific group of people, however we want to call them. And if we really call them like some, I don't know, priests or something like this, it can bring also this like resurrection notions or rebirth, which is, you know, typical for people connected somehow to the ritual and the cult. I think someone raised a hand in the meantime.
Yes. Can I say something? Can I add something?
Yeah, Yannis.
I can. I raise the hand. In my opinion, I think that we should be very careful when we talk about the funerary practices in general, not only in prehistory, but also in the other periods, because it's very fascinating when we try to reconstruct the scenarios that took place many years ago. We should take into account that we have the final episode of a series of different stages that were correlated, of course, with the dead individual. But it is very difficult for us today to interpret and actually understand their perspectives about the role of death, about the role of family, about the role of relatives, etc. It is very easy for us to correlate the the traditions of the past with the traditions of today, but we should avoid it because many times this is not very correct, if I can say. And in my opinion, I think that we should be more careful when we try to reconstruct very impressive scenarios because we need more data. So that is a comment. It's not anything else, because I also study the funerary practices and I try to avoid my enthusiasm when I have a very impressive find. So just this. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Or is anybody else? Is there a line of questions now?
Okay, just yeah, I totally agree that we need to take all those interpretations and ideas with a huge question mark. And also, yeah, I totally agree that it's very easy to implement some modern ideas to the interpretation of the past societies, especially those that we don't have any written sources like Mycenaean and Minoan culture. It's very tempting to use either the ideas from the Greek classical or even going to modern times ideas about the practices. But yeah, if we speculate here, it's just the speculation. I'm not gonna put any of those ideas about entering the chamber to the paper because it's impossible to defend that idea, of course. But yeah, just a speculation. And yeah, I totally agree that we need to be very, very careful and out of possible and words and question marks with all of our interpretations that we can implement here. I think there is another question.
It's me again. I totally agree with you. I just made the comment regarding the question because the question was very fascinating and impressive, and I would like just to add my perception. But I totally agree with you. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
To turn them sound off now.
So yeah, so the an uncareful question was from Yorgos, who notoriously asked those here. As you may notice, Yannis, even though being online, all the weird questions that you heard were coming from him for the last 3 days.
They're not weird.
But I think it's fine to speculate a little bit in the safe environment. And I have a question to Kasia too about the relation between chamber tombs and toloi, because I like what you said about the difference between the public and the private sphere. So relation between the dromos and the chamber. I don't know if I agree that even the family couldn't access the chamber. I mean, obviously, this is what Yannis just said, that we simply can't know and won't know. So this is purely speculation. I think it's a lot to say that even them wouldn't come inside. But my real question is, would you say that it's the relation between the public and the private sphere is the same in the tolos? And then obviously the chamber would be, a limited space that, okay, we can argue who was allowed to enter or not, but it was definitely a limited amount of people, while the dromos was probably the place where the wider public could take part in the funeral rituals. And like, my question is, do you agree that what you said about chamber tombs can 100% relate to tolos tombs too? I mean, that's what I think, but that's why I'm asking. Obviously, there is an answer in the question here, but I'm very curious what you think.
Yeah, totally. I agree with this, that we can put also the same idea from chamber tombs to the toloi. Of course, the scale is different. So if we... okay. So yeah, if we think about group of people who can enter different stages of the ritual and different stages of the architecture, maybe that was also some we can have also some different groups that could enter in case of the toy, since they are somehow connected with the upper sphere of the society, if not the upper of the uppers. But yeah, we can totally put the public and the private sphere from the chamber tombs to the. This idea is the same, I think. Yes, Yannis. Just a second.
Wait, because Yannis, every time you want to speak, we need to turn on the speakers here. So give us a second. And
Sorry for the inconvenience, but I have to say something again. I think that you are talking about the Mycenaean Tholi, right? Just move your head. Okay, because things are totally different in the Minoan, but I just want to ask it. Okay, thank you.
no, I meant
totally Mycenaean burial architecture.
Yeah, the mainland mafia here. I know that everybody else on the room and on the audience probably is from the Cretan part, but yeah, we were talking about mainland. Maybe is there any other question? Because I don't want to take over the thing, and I think we are finishing. But I think the last comment that I had was about the backfilling of the dromoi. That it was. I mean, I agree that it was, and it still is a debate. But I think we both know now, after experiencing work at Pylos and after reading stuff from more recent excavations on chamber tombs, that now this debate is probably coming to an end. I mean, it's more and more obvious that they were backfilled and that the dromos was actually not open, even if the facade to the tolos was very much decorated. I mean, we won't ever know how it was for the largest and best tolos tombs at Mycenae that actually had very decorative facades. So it's kind of weird to imagine that they would cover those facades, but the data we have from the toloi excavated now in Pylos and from the other tombs actually suggests that they were all backfilled. So maybe we should simply accept that, even if it seems weird to us that they would cover the very monumental the decorative facades that they were building. I mean, that's my position for now, even though I was very opposed to that for a long time. But now I think we should simply accept that because that's what data is giving us for now.
I'm still waiting for the the final comment in the publication. So
okay.
That's why I'm
we were
saying
there.
that. That's why I'm saying that there is still a debate going on. Until I have a written publication in front of me. Yeah.
Okay, but there are not only Pylos. There are other other places too. There is the work of Takis Karkanas on chamber tombs, where he also thoroughly documented this fact. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
No, I just wanted to say, you used the word, it may sound peculiar to us, that they, all this elaborate decoration and the facade and everything was not supposed to be seen. I mean, if we think in terms of Egyptian archaeology, the tombs of the pharaohs, which is, I mean, it just goes to show that you can go to great lengths to do things that will be seen only once. Wall paintings, extravagant luxury for all the burial goods, and all this is supposed to be off limits for good. So it doesn't sound that peculiar. It was very much on purpose. It was supposed to be displayed for a specific moment in time. It wanted to give a message at that time, and then maybe the basic idea was protection, to be protected from outside enemies of any, or looters maybe. So the idea that all this was invested for something that would be buried, I don't find that peculiar. I mean, okay.
Okay. I mean, I totally agree. Maybe I used maybe the words were not the best here. I totally agree with what you said. It was just that I was on the opposite side for a long time, believing that the Mycenaean Tholos tombs had to stay open to play a public role in the settlement pattern. That was my idea for a long time, and then my own experience and other stuff made me rethink it. But then I totally agreed that this, if we accept it, it's absolutely understandable, and we have parallels from other civilizations. So yeah, it's just you know, disappointing that they covered it. But yeah, it's maybe more understandable that than I made it sound in the previous comment. Do we have another question or a comment? A comment from Yorgos. Another.
I have a comment to the comment of Ms. Carnava, that in the other hand, when we are talking about symbolism, for painting and symbolic, how can I say, decoration of any kind of this symbolic architecture can be for the same one specific event. And in that terms, it doesn't, it's not done for spectators or for living beings, but it's done for, as you said, for the protection of unreal things, of spiritual beings and other entities that a decoration cannot protect a tomb from looters, but a decoration with specific beings decorated in the minds of an ancient civilization can protect from invisible to the living ones beings.
Are we out of questions? I think it's also high time to be out of questions. We have a round table in front of us, so there will be a lot of opportunity to discuss more. So let's close the last regular session. Now we are heading for a coffee break, and we will be back with the first round table on relational archaeology in about 20 minutes. So if we 100% encourage online participants to stay with us for this.
Larissa.
Okay, thank you, Larissa, too. It was great to have you. Okay, see you, people. And
Κοιτάω
do we
εκεί
have
που
I think that we are ready to start. If you want to turn your microphones on so we can check that you can hear us and we can hear you too.
everybody. And perhaps we can try the screens as well. No?
The screens?
See them?
Yeah.
Τα παιδιά μας βλέπουν έτσι. Έτσι μας βλέπουν.
Αυτό μας λέει, αυτό βλέπω. Ναι.
Εντάξει, οπότε μπορούμε να κάτσουμε και πιο πλαγιαστά.
So can anyone help us with the sound check?
So we can be a little bit with the camera.
No, we don't have sound. If anyone's talking, we can't hear you.
Side and it's listening and it's like aware of what's happening, turn on the camera.
Yes.
I don't know if that was heard.
I think that, yeah, they heard you. Please, whoever's online, can you turn your cameras on so we know you're here? Apparently no one's here yet. Yeah. Hello.
Hello.
We can hear you very well. How about you?
Yes, it's fine.
Great. So let's just wait for the rest. Maybe a couple more people want to log on to sound and video. This is an open discussion, so please feel free to participate. It's for everyone.
Maybe this is a good time.
Hello,
for
Evgenia, we can see
Kopaka
you.
to say something.
Yes. Let's just make sure that everyone's here. Great. I think that now we don't have a problem with sound. So unless the connection, there's a connection problem, we can have all our cameras and our microphones on.
Can we have like 2 minutes to figure if there's a way to give sound to people down there?
Yes. Okay.
Just
So
2 minutes.
just give us 2 minutes more so we give sound to the audience, because we apparently have some audience too.
So
You and Kasia can, yeah. Chuf. Adoni, ένα λεπτάκι. Can you?
so Diana, if you hear me, wait.
I can hear you. Do you hear me?
Yes. We only have one computer, so we're checking if the sound comes from everyone through this one computer. So
Okay, good. Then it's working. Like this one computer.
yes.
Okay. Cool.
So I think we're all ready. We also have Katerina, Professor Katerina Kopaka with us today, who unfortunately couldn't be with us on the first day of the conference for her keynote lecture. But maybe she can say a nice hello to us today, at least online.
What's happening? Or not.
Or not. Professor Kopaka, are you here with us?
Yes, I would need 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, and I'm back.
So we will take 5 more minutes, probably.
Well,
So in the book of abstracts, we also have the main points of our discussion for the first session of the round table. If everyone has it available, we probably should like stay in some kind of schedule during these points. So the discussion doesn't go out of hand.
Just the two of you, be a little bit back
Yes.
because nobody
Because of
can
the,
be seen.
yes, okay. So if you want to take time to find the book of
I
abstracts
want to
and
take time to find my book.
and for the online people, if we have like sound issues on our part, just interrupt us and let us know.
We just have color issues on my part.
Sorry, you had?
We just have color issues here in my case.
Yorgos has a book of abstracts, so you can. Can I cheat from your? Περιμένουμε την κυρία Κόπακα να μας πει δύο λόγια.
And I think Yannis will join us later because he wanted me to let him know. Yeah, and he wrote I'll be there soon.
Yannis Chatzikonstantinou, yeah.
So he will join us.
Well, apparently he'll join us just before we start. Because we're taking some time.
You can ask the participants if they have any kind of...
You can ask, they can hear you.
Yes, we can ask the participants, the online participants, if they have any comment about generally the sessions of this conference, the experience of this conference generally.
Yeah. Was it equally tiring for you?
Or exhausting?
I personally think it went really well. I expect it's super difficult to organize this in a hybrid format, and we've gotten used to being just purely digital. And I think in the beginning it was a bit difficult to organize people coming on at the right time and being there in time for when the participants were ready in live. But apart from that, I think it went really well. It was easy to follow, and I don't know, I generally didn't really experience any issues technical wise. Apart from, losing the entire internet connection for a while yesterday, but I think you've done a good job at like putting things together, yeah.
That's something.
Yeah.
Take mine.
Maybe you should turn your videos off because we have like an unstable internet connection.
Yeah, well, perhaps. Could we, you know what? Could we have like one computer put there out of the way of camera so we can see it? Like the one we have there. We have like 4 computers showing video right now. It's
amazing.
Yes, we could, but that would be a problem because the computer would be like in front of the camera.
I'll try to do it.
Professor Katerina Kopaka is back.
Yes, I'm back.
No. We will turn our sound off and let Katerina speak to us on Andonis.
The was very sudden, was too sudden. Sorry for the delay. And first of all, congratulations to all of you, organizers and their helpers, and of course, participants from far, but also at last from close. And I'm deeply sorry to have had to be among the former ones. A final remark of mine would concern a somewhat epistemological overview of your meeting, of this meeting. And indeed, it is interesting and somewhat moving to see that a rather successful osmosis of processual and post-processual approaches, quantitative and qualitative, material and symbolic ones, has led to a rather solid, very extroverted, and most of all, easygoing, almost spontaneous, among young scholars, relational archaeology of man, nature, and thing in the Aegean Bronze Age, as your already 4 years of Scape meetings show. This took the Greek Academy about 4 decades, I think since the 80s, the early 80s, of teaching and research at Thessaloniki, Rethymno, and all the other departments where prehistory is taught. And it is a real pleasure and a precious reward to see that we are well within our scientific times worldwide of an holistic Anthropocene, as we call it, of a disenchantment of our cognitive worlds, of a magical realism, if you want, or marvelous realism for Aegean people and their human and natural scapes, and their certainly collective realities. So again, many thanks to the whole Scape.con 4 team, and warm wishes for your lives and for devoted, wise, sensitive, and clever research, which will certainly continue to give fascinating Aegean Bronze Age radical scapes as the ones we touched upon, thanks to you, these 3 days at the University of Crete at Rethymno. Be well and work well, and do dare to be cautiously novel and even heretical. I hope to see you tomorrow at Festos, if earthquakes, viruses, and who knows what else, grasshoppers perhaps, permitted. Thank you all, and have a nice continuation.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
and we will see you tomorrow, unless any of these catastrophes happen. In the meantime,
Can we put on
the volume?
the volume, I think
yeah.
that's the highest we can get. Yes.
Just
So online people, please speak up, because,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, okay. I will try and get, you can start and I will try and get the speakers.
All right, now, where are we at? Should we begin?
Yes.
Somehow?
Yeah, we
I think
begin,
it's
we
time.
begin.
Yeah.
Let's begin, Piotr.
No, not with me.
No, that I don't mean begin necessarily with you if you want to. All right, I've tried to prepare something just to break the ice, make a short introduction to this whole thing, get you people actually continue afterwards, so I rest my case. So if nobody else wants to begin, I could have a few words.
Okay, go
Please,
on then.
please. Okay. So I would like to start from the very interesting, I think, point that Diana actually contributed to the primal points of our round table, whether the relational approach is imperative for our Scape.con meetings. And I would like to actually, instead of answering that, shift it to in a different way, to say that the relational approach, but put it in brackets, is kind of imperative for archaeology as a whole, perhaps up to a point that it's maybe even it goes without saying that we're having one. I was thinking that if we consider that we're talking about the Aegean Bronze Age, we're talking about a region characterized by what we could say as micro locality. That means like an assemblage of various different small regions, each with its own characteristics, up to a point that no place is like totally the same with the other, in terms of the environment, the landscape, the resources, the cultures, of course, that are presented, architecture, and whatsoever. This micro-regionalism in the Aegean is thoroughly closely related to the Bronze Age and the subsequent, and perhaps the previous as well, civilizations that occurred in the region. And moreover, the Aegean region as a whole is deeply related with the neighboring regions. So since what we're trying to do is comprehend the social developments in said region, it's my point of view, but I think it might be a shared opinion as well, that we have to consider all this in a relational approach, relations about different regions, different times, different places, and of course of the various components that make each region, each case, each culture, its time, its period, and etc. So I wouldn't say that relational archaeology is imperative for ScapeCon, not necessarily, but that this approach is imperative for modern archaeology in order to go on and go forth from having us in mind that we're studying ancient stones or artifacts or whatever, that's not to be taken personally or offensive, but rather than in understanding this, what I think what I mentioned also in our welcome meeting, a nexus of animate and inanimate conditions that create a living world that evolves, not in the evolutionary way of speaking, but in the process of becoming and not unbecoming as it goes, as a whole. So in order to actually kind of sum up this thing with talking about revolutions, which is the current concept of the concept of our current conference, and the question that we had, we put like, there's revolutions in relational archaeology. I think it's a difficult one, and I don't really know what we're thinking about when we actually put that in. And I'm saying this because I believe that revolutions, also in brackets, of course, are always relational. And that means is what I mean with that is that revolution is actually a new approach on the previous relations and a process in forming new relations between the social groups, the environment, and the materials as a whole. So I believe that, in fact, the fact actually that we acknowledge, let's say axiomatically, that we are talking about relations in all sorts of ways between people, things, and nature. And I would add about the past and the present as well, is by itself revolutionary enough. It takes us a step ahead from thinking that we just talk about an ancient form of acts or a glorious past about cultures or civilizations or whatever, or even some kind of, let's say, mathematical or hard science approach in a way to prove forms and equations of how things would be and would become, or even about from considering that everything we approach in archaeology and archaeological way is it's a personal perspective, and without rejecting any of the creative insight that all this might bring to the table about archaeology. The fact we're the basis of our discussion is talking about relationships. It's a minor revolution in its own, because relations can change, do change, and I think this is the first conceptual acknowledgement that we have to have for ourselves for a revolution in its own. So that was it for my part from for now. You should talk.
Okay, may I?
Yes,
I
of
think I
course.
tried to answer all the questions at once.
At once,
I tried,
yeah.
I make some.
You tried to
make a
answer all
small-
the questions
or a
once,
small
and now
introduction.
and now it's difficult to.
It's
huh?
just a personal
Let me
comment.
be after your.
Okay, because I want to maybe to go back to the first one. What is and what is not relational archaeology, and is it imperative for ScapeCon? And I agree with what you said, that it's basically any modern systemic approach that puts together multiple factors can be termed relational. Because to be honest, we've never, through all those years of ScapeCon happening, it's probably more difficult to say what is not relational archaeology than what it is. Because if you think about it, a lot of approaches can be termed relational. But I can't say from the top of my head what is not. Because all of us, if we are in like modern methodology and modern theory, and because of where the environment that we work in, obviously that's what we are into, then obviously we have to use the relational, one of the relational approaches, which is basically all that is around for now. Like all of the, maybe if we would go to some older works, we can find something that is definitely not relational, but all that we do is basically this, because that's what everybody is always telling us, that you need to take all the factors into account. You need to think about the environment, you need to think about the external forces and internal strikes and all of this. It's just what archaeology is now, basically. But maybe somebody can point us what is clearly not relational archaeology. But I think it's important to then maybe think about how, if it is imperative for the conference, how can we redefine it so it means something? Because if the definition is this, what I just said and what Adonis said before me, it simply means that the conference is about modern Aegean archaeology, period. And there is no, and I'm not saying that it's not fine, because maybe that's what we want. And partially that is what we like. We never kicked out anybody, and we were never like, oh, this is not good for us. But maybe we have to think what really defines the theme of the conference, if relational archaeology is so broadly defined that it's not really narrowing anything anymore. That's my thought. Yorgos. Your turn.
That was fast.
Because I'm not going to answer all at once. I will leave something for the.
That's well thought. Also, we shouldn't monopolize the conversation here.
Yes, let's have Yorgos speak, and then the online people can just freely open your microphones and interrupt like we do.
Because it's not that easy to watch the chat as well if you're commenting. So
yeah,
just speak out loud and make us stop.
Yeah. Yorgos?
So, concerning about relational archaeology, I would like to, just as Piotr said in his phrase before, in a phrase, that is it real relational archaeology, or it is just archaeology? This is a big question mark, because archaeology, as we know, the term and how would say the meaning, the essence of archaeology is relationships and the human beings. So I'm a little bit thinking about this in a more philosophical way, that if we have what we have, if we have perspectives already in front of us as archaeologists, and if we are serving science that it is by definition serving the human nature and the understanding of human nature, why we are keeping boxing it, putting in boxes and frames fields or aspects of what we have already. So this is one of my thoughts that I would like to hear more, especially the online people. And the other thing is that, in my opinion, it's as concerns with the revolution in relational archaeology, is that, in my opinion, the revolution in relational archaeology is our revolution, our inner revolution of how we see archaeology and the ancient world. So I'm waiting for any other thoughts.
Do we have something from feedback from online people?
I think they're a bit shy.
Okay, I'll just open the mic if no one else wants to.
Right.
to just maybe give a perspective from the beginnings of ScapeCon, because as y'all just mentioned, what we consider as relational archaeology is that basically not just doing archaeology nowadays. And when we started out with our call for papers in 2018 for Heidelberg, we had a bit more of a narrow definition of what we were asking for, what kind of papers we were looking for. And it was basically all on the assumption that we need to talk more about human culture, not just being a product of man, but a product of the interaction of humans and their relational surroundings, handling conflicts posed by necessities that come from within society, but that also are imposed upon society. And we were trying to define different relational areas that surround human development in general. And we were starting to talk about the scapes, the landscapes, seascapes, mountainscapes, and so on. Today we had the cavescapes and things like that. So we had this more narrow definition to place humans into a network that they don't only create, but that also recreates the human part of it. And I think it was a good starting point for the relational archaeology, for the conferences. And it was really interesting to see how it just broadened up throughout the succeeding different conferences, breaking boundaries, revolutions, and so on. And it was really interesting to add new things. But I think we've kind of left that initial relational archaeology the way it was also coined as a term in the literature. I'm thinking about Tim Ingold and things like that. So what we're actually doing now, and I absolutely agree, is we're still putting things into relation, but we're not, matter of fact, doing relational archaeology in the strict sense that we started out at the beginning. And it makes absolute sense, because there's no reason, no sense to repeat doing the same theoretical concept year after year after year. We just have to grow a bit more. And that's why I asked this kind of critical question: do we still need relational archaeology? Is it imperative for the ScapeCon? Is this something we have to kind of keep alive because it's a tradition, or is it something that we can safely say, no, we want this out? We will frame our future conferences in a way that will ask questions that lead us to think relationally. but that don't necessarily try to impose this concept that has really broadened up and that's all soggy now onto people who want to join with an abstract. Just some ideas from my behalf.
Okay.
I can definitely think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, part of the problem is that we have a second table, the future of ScapeCon, where we kind of want to discuss this. And this was supposed to be more theoretical. So maybe, because the thing is that I like very much what Diana said here, that maybe it's the time to leave the whole relational theme behind us and think of the new scheme for the conference, if it's going to be institution, let's say. I mean, if it's going to survive. But that's maybe for the next table.
I think, yes, I think we can go into discussing the theoretical concept of ScapeCon here. I think that the second roundtable will be more about practical issues, probably.
Okay.
So I think we can
openly
openly discuss if we want relational.
Then I can relate to that. So yeah, I mean, I remember also in the 2018 in Heidelberg on the first conference that it was, I mean, and at the very beginning in the original concept, there was more to it, to this relational approach. And then we expanded and expanded, but I think what Diana kind of suggested, I mean, not straightforward suggested, but it is true that we just kept broadening the term to have as many contributions as possible without really thinking what was the original definition. But on the other hand, also what she said, that it wouldn't have any there's any reason to do the same conference over and over. So maybe it's time to leave because I mean, I think we all agree that and this is something that we all probably said, all who contributed for now said, that relational is very broad now, like basically everything is relational. And maybe it's the time to leave it behind us and think of something new. I mean, think of a new definition of what ScapeCon can be. And maybe one direction that we can go into are the scapes, but in a different, somehow different approach. Because I think it would be a shame to lose the name. Like the name already kind of grew, and we should use it. We should use it because it's a good tradition. It's a thing that many people already like. Something rings when they hear the name. So we can't just, erase everything and build from the ground. This should be used. We should build on the stuff that we have. So that's one thing that maybe we should think of a new theme for the conference, or a new approach how to build all of this. Yeah, that's all for now from me. I had something in mind, but it escaped. So.
Just a short comment on what Piotr was saying. I'm in total agreement with this idea. Sorry, if you can hear me. I am in total agreement with this idea. I believe that the term scapes actually is a lot more helpful and creative than the term relational. At this point, at the point where we've reached now, it's not just because it's a good trademark name, because I think it is.
but it is important.
It is, yes, of course. And I said, not just because of that, but also because it gives the idea of the scape, of the wide view of where that picture that we're looking at, and not just digging into. So that's just a
context of research, more specific, but at the same time broad. Context for research.
Or a way of actually approaching the archaeological data from a part as scapes in a very broad sense, whether that has to do with objects or it has to do with a theoretical view of things.
But if we go into this direction and say that this is what we want to do, it should actually be enforced. Like the Louvain team organizing the next conference should enforce it on the speakers that you should always present your scape. You should present your research and give us the broader context and what is your scape, right? Because otherwise it's gonna be another idea that maybe works at the beginning partially, and then we forget it and we do another conference, and it's completely vague, like relational archaeology that we basically now define as any systemic approach that is basically any modern methodological approach to archaeology.
I agree with that as well.
Okay, who else? Online people.
What do you think?
Oh, we've been talking 3 days now. I'm tired. No?
No, no way.
Not really?
Generally, I think the idea is good to go back to those scapes and really look for that. And I think one of the main issues we have is we need to have topics that are broad enough to encourage enough people to submit an abstract, okay? Because early career researchers, like people writing their MA or they're studying on their PhD, they have very closely defined areas of expertise where they can talk about, and we need to find theoretical models that we can approach from very different material or research backgrounds. And I think talking about the scapes does make a lot of sense. You can talk about the local scapes like we did in the first ScapeCon, mainly like seascape, landscape, whatever. But also I really like the point that you just made about the theoretical scapes, about maybe object groups or different kinds of material data, whatever. Yeah, so for me, it does make sense to focus more on that part and to keep the trademark, definitely.
Of course. It is actually what we said, like we're giving a specific context we're giving a specific context that nevertheless remains broad enough, not enough, really broad in terms.
It needs to be broad, but not too broad in general, right? Because we don't want to have just people doing what they always do. We want them to think along like the red line of the conference theme, to contribute something that will be more than just their usual research, but also to feel comfortable about the data they're handling.
Yeah.
Yes, this is the specific context of the scapes.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. From our experience and this conference having to do with revolutions, what we went through was mostly whatever had to do with changes and shifts, and how we could decide what is a revolution or not, or we come back to the idea what is a revolution or what is not a revolution. From my experience in my research, I have seen that we should probably involve in all these, even theoretical and practical designation of the theme of the conference, the essence of the past, so the past scapes, for example, and how these transform or change the way people act or they interact with other people and things and nature. And I think this is a parameter that should be included, even if it changes a little bit the whole theoretical context of this conversation. But I think that is a very important parameter. The past scapes, or the scapes of the past, as parameters for change. I suppose we shouldn't leave behind the essence of change in this scape context we're going to put the whole conference. I don't know if you have to say something about that.
Then what about like stable scapes? You know, because the thing is that we are always drawn towards talking about change and how I mean, I'm not a good example here because my presentation was exactly this, talking about the change in the period, like the looking for the revolution, exactly this. But on the other hand, I'm not like, I think that there is a big value that is rarely seen and talking about the periods of stability too, and defining them better. And that is probably something that is still a field that gives more possibilities, research possibilities, because
Yeah.
that is something that is not yet so used, you know.
Yeah.
So, you know, as I agree that this is one approach, then I don't think that we can completely leave out, like in the Scapes idea, the stable, the describing a stable environment and or defining it. It also has to be there. Like we can't leave out this, and I even think that maybe one of the future installment of the conference should actually encourage people to do this, to talk more about stability, not change, because that's something that we like rarely. Everybody wants to look for a revolution. I mean, I liked your team. It's not a critique, but it's good to have the like. This is a thing that I think is rarely touched. Especially, I mean, obviously, this has a lot to do with times that we live in now, right? It's not a coincidence that I think the most commented book of the last year was Collapse and Transformation. There was the volume by Guy Middleton. And all the other, there was like multiple collapse volumes, and there is all of this collapse thing. That's the theme of the recent years, and it's obviously no coincidence, because that's probably what we will experience as a civilization in the next couple decades. So it's not coincidental, and we can't fight this force because it's way bigger than our small conference here. This is just the direction in which science will go, because all of our civilization will go into this and to how to oppose the collapse. But in the meantime, we can still have our small interests here and our small way of maybe including the stability too. That's just, yeah.
I could say that it depends to which civilization we are belong to. And this is a matter of personal matter of each of us. So I would say that I would clarify my former option about scapes, and if it's and about the whole matter, that scape is related to vision, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a way, we have vision, and so we have scape in different ways. Okay, so I am point out again my previous opinion anyway, suggestion that ScapeCon and Scape generally can be changed, not only suggesting revolutions or changes or shifts or whatever, but can be enriched by the personal scapes of each of the researchers. I mean that it can be like a scape of a personal scape of each one that can be changed and suggested, or how can suggested generally to conferences. I don't know if I'm clear.
Do you mean, do you mean that we should include our personal scapes in the way we see archaeological scapes?
I mean
because
that,
this is not something. It's something
we
should avoid. not include.
Wait, I will illustrate more that escape can be revolutionary or not, but the same scape seen from different sides of view of different researchers with different principles, let's say, could be revolutionary even for the same subject. I mean that if my scape is different, I can, and if I have the same subject with another one researcher, my scape will be totally different than the other researcher. Do you understand what I mean?
Can I jump in there?
Completely the same subject.
Yeah, but this variability exists, I suppose. It's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's correct to think about scapes as being something subjective and individual. I think that's kind of jeopardizing our line of argument if we start arguing that scapes are individually different and subjective. We should approach it as a concept that different scholars can use and employ for their own work to streamline it, and not to say, but this is my scape and this is your scape, so let's not agree on that. I think that it's a bit dangerous to treat it in that way.
No,
just to be sorry to be so critical about that, but that was just like my first impulse right now.
I think that
it's not about disagreement. Yes.
The more appropriate word for that is, I think, approach rather than escape.
Yes.
Approach perhaps creates a different vision of escape.
Bravo, exactly.
I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree on that. Okay. I think that was just a question of terminology.
Sorry for my English.
Don't worry.
Everybody's trying hard. And Daniel also wanted to comment something.
Yeah, I just wanted to expand a bit the topic already disserted. For the simple fact that when we talk about relational archaeology and what is changing as also as archaeologists in this case is simply because we are gradually, I believe, through relational archaeology and in general through our evolution of archaeology through the decades and different generations of archaeologists to pass from the point of view of the archaeologists and then a present point of view to the point of view of the people that actually lived in a certain time. So it's a continuous evolution. We have already dimensioned relational archaeology to objects, to other people, to animals, but it's also relational archaeology to the dead, which became somewhat objectified, and to the rituals, that the rituals serve to the living, not to the dead. So a tenet of post-processual archaeology is that everything is ritual. Everything we don't understand is ritual.
All symbolic,
but we are gradually, through these approaches, starting to understand what the people living at that time wanted from rituality, and that ritual and everything actually has sense. And so we are keeping going on the track, going even closer, hopefully, to understand what people at the time actually wanted, which is our big problem, because you all know that the big problem with archaeology that we are discussing about dead people. And dead people, unfortunately, or fortunately, don't answer questions. So it's a continuous voyage, and I think that the purpose of Scapecon is exactly going closer to what these people actually meant.
But I think, thanks to Daniel, we reached maybe the biggest question of archaeology ever.
Yes.
Is it like, because at least that's what I think, that this way towards understanding the past people is a way that there is no end here. There's no goal to reach. I mean, the goal that is supposedly to understand them is completely unreachable. I mean, we can differ here. That's what I believe, that there's no way that we will ever fully understand them. That is a road that will just go and go and go, and that we can develop new approaches. And what is more, we can even think about if it's only our illusion that every new like methodological approach and the new theory that we develop, is it real that it gets us closer to the past, or is this purely illusionary thing? And how can we know that that what we think of the past is anyway better or closer to what past people actually thought than than previous researchers from, let's say, 100 years. Like, this is all purely in our heads only, that we think that we developed so much new methods and theory that now we have better view. And of course, sometimes there is some hard data, like hopefully archaeology has this part. It's not purely humanity and humanities, and there is some hard data here that we can build on. But still, I think that the road has no end here, that we will never truly understand. And I think for me, it's important to acknowledge that and kind of accept the fate of archaeology.
It's a bit fatalistic though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we can never reach full understanding, and that's utopic, and there's probably also no need to reach full understanding, but I do believe strongly that we're making progress towards understanding people and society at certain points of time, but also finding general patterns and truths that maybe we can even, approach today and apply to modern society to better understand things like reacting in catastrophic situations, contingency, and so on. I think we can really learn things about that. And I think the point that Daniela was making is, and the main point why we back in 2018 decided to have a theoretical concept in the background, is that we should stop just making typologies and looking for hands and looking very artistorically at the material and not really getting the relation to the people, right?
And yeah, actually, that was also a comment from Katerina Kopaka. She suggests here, escaping towards an archaeology of people then.
But may I back up Diana and perhaps Kopaka as well, that certainly it's a mission impossible almost to understand completely past people and ways of thought. But, and I think that this is what's the important thing here, is that I believe that we can make better and more successful efforts to understand their scapes. I mean, perhaps we will never completely understand their approach on things, but we can better and better understand the context in which they are creating their thoughts and their approach on things. So I think that this is one of the beauties, perhaps, of Scape and this kind of approach, that we are trying to, we could try to find a way to escape this, not escape, to escape this seemingly and practically perhaps never-ending quest, but in a creative way, by accepting that the quest is perhaps never ending, but always advancing in a way. And this now, I will make a big or rather huge leap in the discussion to try to connect it with the previous talk about stability and revolution. To say that if we think about it, if we think about the idea of scapes, all right, and the stability of scapes, as we said, what we're practically talking about largely is what perhaps Brodel was talking about in the essence of the longue durée, which is actually that we have a huge environment, but not from the environmentalistic approach, right? But rather a huge complex of parameters that largely, let's say, but don't really mean define the way that the cultures
or contribute to the way.
Yes, the way that the cultures are formed. It's actually, it was in Bordeaux's way of thinking that the revolutions, but talking about the events of revolutions, have a minor effect on the social processes. But this is not because things don't change or remain actually stable all the time, but rather because change occurs in a long process that where the numerous parameters stay the same, in a way, stay the same, and contribute to how people react to them and adapt to them. So
it's like a symptom.
Yes,
somehow.
It's not like stability and revolution are that much contradictory, or even that stability and change are not that much contradictory in the long run. You have both at the same time. You have stable parameters, you have stable scapes, and you have change within the stable scapes as well.
My turn?
If you want to.
I mean, I see what you're saying, but I don't agree that the change is completely escapes us, because I mean, I agree that it's a long process in which the certain events are only the symptoms, as you said, or like the starting points of something huge. And you're right that it's, you know, that it's in a long run, when we can have seemingly stable time, this is actually where the long time change happens in a long run, instead of this one short period that we usually try to define as a revolution. The real revolution is what comes next in 100 years after that. But on the other hand, I think there's still a huge potential in defining those starting points, those moments of actual change. But instead of defining them as huge revolutions, I think the potential is here for the political history, because that's something that completely escapes Aegean Bronze Age archaeology so far. Like, we are always so afraid of building any political history narrative, and it's understandable because of how our written sources are, and obviously, and this plus the relation to Homer and all the other sources causes us to be like extremely careful, and nobody wants to write any political history. But I think, as I agree that the deep social and material changes are something that's happening in the long run, the political history actually lives and thrives on those short moments of change, those events that we so far completely didn't even try to really define them. Like the 1200 BC thing is a huge example here, that it's an event that nobody really tried to define, like what it was politically, what the event was really. We say it's the collapse of the palaces, but that's it. And then we go immediately to this long run, but we still have the potential, I think, to say more about the actual moments of change. I mean, I think that the search for the revolutions is still not in this small sense of just an event, one moment of some huge change, usually political change. It's still not done. There is still potential there, I think, in unhurting the political history for Aegean.
Just a small point. I agree with that. I'm just saying that it's not contradicting, actually. That's what I'm
exactly.
That's
it's complementary, and in fact, I suppose that it's also conceptual. We cannot figure a change without having in mind what is the previously more stable situation that is contradicted probably from a small episode of a change, or what a change is. So even conceptually, I think that they're part of the same wholeness. So we have to find a systematic way to define or to tell apart these two different situations.
Yeah, and I think there is value in this, in this division, and finding the events that, even if the actual change, as we said, it's a long time thing that's happening actually in those periods before and after the
or
events.
Changes that cannot be seen in the long process.
Yeah, agreed.
Not important this is not very important.
Or can it return?
If it comes out, if it comes back to you,
Yes.
then
Yes.
yeah. Okay.
People from afar?
Any ideas?
I have thoughts too.
Who would have thought so?
We have to listen to the online participants.
So I think now we move to the last thing, really, revolution, right? Yeah. So it makes sense. We're actually moving forward through the topics. So now the topic is the revolutions. So are the online people have something to contribute to the revolutions topic?
Or not?
They're still shy. The floor is yours then.
We have radio silent from those.
I mean that okay, there are a lot of issues that we have to solve. One of them is that during the conversation that we have to define personally, each of us, that in which grade they consider themselves, someone is considered himself to be considered to be related with the former eras and the former societies. And another issue that we haven't mentioned yet is that we have to be optimistic. Okay, this is my principle, that we have to be optimistic about our understanding about former societies, but we have to be also realistic that if a researcher simply makes his examinations and methods and methodologies and blah blah blah, etc., just for being archaeologist or whatever, and he has little of a relationship with the subject that he is examined. I mean, not only the objects, but also the context of the objects, the scapes of the. Of course, yes, because, for example, for someone that studies Minoan culture,
he has to live in
Crete. He has to live. Yes,
matter.
Of course, he has to live in Crete. If he doesn't know, if he sees sites from the maps, he cannot realize what for example, mobility. How was the mobility? If he doesn't know about special features of the island and how these features, like geology, like plantation, and so on, how they affect the people here. And there are features that they are lying millions of years, not just some thousands. So there are affecting continuously the people. So then he can make a very, very mistaken results in his research about mobility, about the strength, about strategies, about many kinds of things. This is one. And the other is that if I make a question to all of you, that how you could describe the societies of 2021, we would have, let's say we are here, some people, if we have 100 of people, we will get 100 different options and all of them will be right. I mean that there is no one scape relation or aspect. It can be everything. And I mean that we have to be also open to new ideas or new thoughts or new changes. And as I mean changes, I'm pointing out all of my thoughts. I mean, as far as I'm speaking right now, I am speaking for myself. I don't put myself in a civilization or some context is whatever, and I guess this can be applied to everybody, because if we try to, for example, understand and then make interpretation of the society of, let's say a country, for example, Italy or Spain, I don't know in which, I mean, we will all have our personal aspects and scapes, and I don't know if we will still reach an aspect or escape that a Spanish could give us. I mean, we have to put this thing on the table.
Yes, but in my opinion is that archaeological interpretation should be unbiased. A personal view, because of a theoretical approach that anyone has adopted, is escape as you describe it. But in the end, it has to be unbiased, and it should not unbiased with no.
It means that something that affects your view. It's
Viewpoint.
I don't know how to really explain it. In Polish, it's the same. We don't have the word bias.
Anyway, I think it's difficult that archaeological research may be unbiased.
Yes. Ευχαριστούμε, Γιάννη. Ναι. Αντώνης, συγγνώμη, ο Γιώργος Αντώνης.
Yes, may I illustrate a little bit more that I'm not talking about a personal opinion. I mean that every research has to have methodology, has to have scientific methods and rules. I'm not talking about opinion, but I'm talking about scientific processes. So in this kind of processes, I mean that even we have this, for example, a stone. Let me, for example, put here an example that Pearson, in Archaeology of Death, he pointed out that, for example, the deskination, how is από σάρκος του κοκάλου.
Θα μας πει ο Γιάννης.
For example, for a Western, when we have the in the burial processes, when we have some practices of taking out the skin of the bones. Deflation, okay, thank you very much. So when we have deflation, Pearson suggested that, not suggested, but gave an example that for a Western, he could interpret it as a practice of cannibalism or else. For Indian origin, Native American origin archaeologists, it would not be a cannibalism, but a ritual practice. Yes. So I mean that both of them are scientists, but I mean that we have to put it on the table also, this
exactly this is a kind of the bias I was saying, because when studying the past, of course we have our own cultural ideas, and this is where ethnography comes in to open up our perception of how different people can, and how in different ways, how they act in different ways. But because you actually gave the example of how we perceive ourselves, I think we should not do that. Give that example, because we cannot be unbiased with what we are experiencing. We can try to do that when studying the past, because we can take a step back and see a better image. When we are in a situation, I think this is mostly impossible. So this is my objection, that the comparison between what we are actually experiencing with ourselves and with our world today is completely different to how we approach the past and archaeological data.
I disagree because I think that how we approach archaeology in every generation has much to do as our generational experience. The most recent example, not in archaeology in street, but in general, it has been a boom on an interest on pandemics intention. So also the relational approach come out from increasing funding in anthropology. When for the simple fact that as archaeologists we have to deal with hard man events. We find the palace to rise, the palace to fall, tombs built, tomb abandoned, and so on. We have small to do in the middle, and we are since the beginning struggling with filling it. And basically, generation after generation, we are doing our best in this moment, the relational approach that it seems quite useful, although you can say that it's possibly impossible to fill everything. But it's a very, very biased thing, and we cannot help it. For the simple fact we are not these people, and we can only figure it. So new approach come only from our personal experience. And so I think it's simply impossible to take a step back and thinking objectively, because it's difficult. It's totally difficult, and I think the next generation with the new experience will bring very different approaches that maybe we will even find out.
Can I say also something here from my?
Of course.
I think that we all agree that the interpretation is the most difficult part of our research, actually, despite the fact that many of you study pottery, others dead people. The interpretation is the most difficult part, and I'm not sure that the next generation will find the solution, because we are humans, we study humans, and we try to answer to human things. And as you probably know by yourself, we don't know even ourselves. It's difficult to understand the others. And so we need much effort and much patience in order to reach this point. But the thing is that through this conference, and not only through this specific conference, but through the conferences in which young scholars and students, young postgraduate students and young researchers participate, is that we have the chance to hear things that the older scholars are afraid to say, if you understand what I mean. Many of you probably during your research, you have to deal with new approaches, new innovations, new things in general, and all of us, and me as well, are afraid of saying something revolutionary probably. And the good thing with this conference is that it gives the chance to the younger to say their opinion, say their perception, and of course give the chance to discuss each other and actually find a common way. And I think that the future also of this conference is to follow this rule, not to find a strict rule with strict theoretical frameworks and strict in general instructions, and give the chance to us and also to the younger students not to be afraid of saying their opinion. We are not here to judge anyone. We are not professors. We are not even, most of us are during our research. We haven't finished it yet. So I personally want to hear new things, and also through the new things to improve my perception about the things. Because experimental archaeology is interesting also. Ethnographical studies are very important as well. And I think that we should give the chance to new things in order to improve also our perception about the traditional perceptions about the Aegean archaeology. This is just a comment, sorry for the time, and thank you very much.
Absolutely agree with that.
More of that.
I will agree with Yannis, and I would like to make a comment on this, that what we should do is promote a more broad way of thinking and a more broad way of researching and looking into things, which means that we have to acquire a relational concept of what we are doing, which means that we have to incorporate, apart from archaeological theory and practice and methodology, anthropology and other sciences that promote this broadness in the way we see what we are doing. Just that small comment in what Yannis just said. Anything else?
Someone texted something to the chat.
Yes, so.
Something in the chat.
Monica Zeicher said, bravo,
We're not
Yanni.
alone here. There are more people out there.
Okay, anyone else want to add something to the discussion?
Well, it's 3 o'clock.
We can go to lunch.
We can go to lunch, and if things are not strict, whatever we want, we can discuss it afterwards as well.
Yes, in the next session, you will. Yes.
With no boundaries, as Yannis just said, not strict boundaries in the way we're doing it.
We have done a very good wordplay with the boundaries entangling, escaping.
But I think it's a nice, like everything what Yannis said about the organization of the conference and what the conference stands for, this particular conference. It's a good point to finish this discussion, because this is exactly what we can discuss in the second table.
Yes.
Things,
yes.
Like what this institution is really about. And I agree absolutely with him that it cannot and should not only be about theory, whatever theoretical approach we choose, but I think it was always important for this conference. I mean, for example, for us, when we took from Heidelberg to be open, to have the accommodation for people and be like really welcoming to everybody, and have like push for discussions and be as open with discussions as possible. And I think it worked really well here. That's really a big congrats to you. That despite the hybrid form and everything, we had really good discussions here, and that's the point. Okay.
Yeah, it's good working out. All right.
Yeah.
So thank you, people. See you.
Can go for lunch.
When is the keynote lecture?
The not keynote lecture. We have the second
round table.
Second round table.
And after that,
At 7 o'clock is the keynote.
3 minutes. 4:30 we come back for the second part of the round table.
Okay.
At 7 we have
The keynote lecture. So you are all invited for the procession of this whole thing.
See you in a while. Let's take a breather now.
Alexei, have fun.
Ευχαριστούμε.
Ευχαριστούμε.
See you in a while, folks.